morning, everyone. I'm Robin Hutchison. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Minneapolis. I'm very happy to be here for these next couple of days. And I feel privileged to introduce Tim Papandreou, and that is how you say his last name, Papandreou. Everyone, very good. Tim is a longtime colleague and friend of mine, and long ago, Tim was my advisor on technology when he took my phone, created a Twitter account for me, and then tweeted something and said, "You are now on Twitter." So for a long time, Tim has been very technology forward and has been advising at so many different levels. I sometimes thank Tim for that moment and sometimes do not, depending on what comes over that day. But Tim has a varied experience, and that will come through in his talk today. He is a key strategic advisor and trusted thought leader to companies and governments on emerging transportation trends. He does this work as the founder of a company called City Innovate. He co-founded City Innovate, a smart city platform creating tactical win-win solutions. Before this, he was in strategic partnerships with Google, X, and Waymo, collaborating with teams to prepare and launch the world's first fully self-driving ride service. He did this while being fully immersed in the technology. As Chief Innovation Officer for San Francisco's Transportation Agency, he led teams to deliver the US Smart City Challenge. He delivered on a 50% sustainable mode share goal 3 years ahead of schedule. He led key redevelopment projects, and he also worked diligently on the city's Vision Zero traffic safety program. Tim has unique insights that draw from his varied experience, and he has an incredibly strong track record to lead teams, build partnerships, and deliver innovative projects. We are very lucky to have Tim talking to us today, and I'm so glad that he'll be able to set our tone and really create a vision, share a vision that will help us move forward for the next 2 days. So I'd like to introduce and welcome up here Tim Papandreou.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like imposter syndrome. Like, who is she talking about? Is that me? Okay. So let's see if this is going to work. Let's just show how technologically savvy I am. I'm going to present. Is it up? Yay. Oh. No? No one knows what to do. Okay. I'll let Chelsea, the fabulous Chelsea, take care of this right now. I think it just needs to go to the screen share. Is it working? No problem. I'm going to get the other mic because I like to move around. Is this working? Is this working? No? Yes. Okay. Oh, great. So, thank you for that incredible introduction, Robin. I'll give you the money after and make sure that you feel adequately compensated. I'm really fortunate to be in this position to inspire you all for the next couple of days, and thank you, Laurie, and everybody for organizing this. Anyone who's actually had to develop these programs knows how much work goes into getting this done, and I usually say no to these things, but it was so well thought out, and also Robin twisted my arm so to come. But it's really important to understand how much profound change is going to be happening over the next couple of years, and the work that you're setting today is the beginning of that conversation. So it's a really important first step. So I think you all truly should thank yourselves for giving yourself the time to actually want to see this through, because it's going to be pretty profound. I have a few quick questions. I'd like to understand the room very quickly before I start talking. Who is from local government? Okay, quick hands, okay. Who is from state or federal or regional government? Okay. And who is from the consulting world in transportation, policy, etc.? You need to put your hand up, Ross. And then who is from the private sector, from like the transportation industry itself? Okay. Any transportation, automotive companies represented today? All right. Any developers, land use developers, any construction, etc.? Okay. Academic is not the last but least. Okay. And anybody else who has not been mentioned, community services, NGOs, etc., etc. Okay, Great, awesome, good mix. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do to get ready for this next transition. But before I do that, I want to tell you a quick little story about myself, because you're thinking, this guy has an accent, where's he from? Those of you who have been to Australia will recognize it a little bit, but I'm actually from many other places. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of my family really quickly, because transportation is fundamental to all of us. And how we got here, unless you are, even if you're an indigenous person who walked over one of the land bridges, you needed some form of transport to get here to where we are today. Many, many years ago, the story in our family goes that my great-great-grandfather took a ship over to New York, immigrated to the US, got his first job working on railroads, very high-tech back then. Made his way across to California, had a family. One of the offspring decided that this was not for them, and so they married somebody and they went back to Europe, and all in the space of a generation. Their grandson decided that this was not for them, and my dad and his family decided to come down to Melbourne, to Australia. So they took the ship. It was a 4-week trip. Went through the Suez Canal, all across Africa, saw things they could never imagine, ate things like bananas, which they'd never eaten before, so that sort of stuff. So this is not very long ago. And then enter the jet age. My mom has an idea that she's going to leave Europe and come to Australia as well, because it's a cool, hip thing to do, because all the cool kids were coming to Australia back then. And she journeyed a 45-hour flight with 4 stops at the age of like 14 with her sister to come down to see this new place. And then she was shocked. She landed and she saw these 2-legged deer things jumping everywhere, and she said, where am I? So it was really bizarre. And then they had me, and as soon as I was born, living in Melbourne for a few years, I decided to repeat, and I came back to where my great-great-grandfather first left off. So this cycle is pretty normal for many families. So none of this was possible without transportation. So I just want to show that the fundamental difference of how things happened. And what I experienced growing up in Melbourne and Los Angeles is profoundly different from what my parents and grandparents experienced growing up in their worlds with their transportation, how it was part of their societal life. And then my kids are going to have a completely different experience. So this thing is quite cyclical, but it's also very profound. So, okay, enough of that. Let's get back to the topic. So, technology. Technology has been incredible for so many things. And over the last 10 years, we cannot believe and imagine the things that we had before that and how we actually organized our lives. So, it is a feat of magic that your mobile phone works everywhere in the world now. Before that wasn't the case because of standardization of technology with cell servers. GPS allowed us to pinpoint ourselves and things everywhere in the world. The development of the smartphone. I originally worked as an intern on developing digital cellular systems, and we thought there may be 2 million people using this anywhere ever again. And what we use right back then, they're a little bit larger phones, and we're like, people are going to make calls, and we don't know what else they'll do. We never would have imagined that there would have been the creation of all of these different services that we can't live without now. But the biggest profound change for mobility was the development of application-based protocols called APIs that allowed things to now to touch all those points and create things for you that just weren't available. And what's interesting is that all of these companies emerged and dominated a particular space in that world, which is very, very new. It's only like the last 10 years. And so we call these things graphs. So they're graphs of society. Google has managed to dominate the information graph. It's become a verb. You Google something. You don't actually do. So I work for Google, and so we always say it's called search, right? No, people Google things. They don't search anything. They Google stuff. Facebook has basically taken front runner in social. They know more about your social events and social interactions than you do. Employment. LinkedIn knows more about the economy, what's happening at the regional, local, and global level, and the state of unemployment and employment, and the hot new trends and skill sets needed than anybody else. And then recently in retail, Amazon has really come in and said, we're actually going to own this space. Entertainment is still a tug of war. It hasn't been decided yet between Netflix and YouTube, but YouTube, 1/5 of the world watches a YouTube clip every day. So that is incredible. It's gone from 1% to 1/5 in a couple of years. So these are ramping up really quickly to take on. The next big frontier is mobility, and that's an area where a lot of people are looking at taking on this space. There's some downsides to technology, right? And some good sides and some downsides. And it all depends on who's what and whatever. So it's fantastic that you know when your train's coming and you can actually use this integrated system, but sometimes it's not the thing that we like to do. We're reminded, though, that the technology of the day doesn't necessarily change or improve the social behavior of the day as well, because this was 100 years ago. Same thing. No one's talking to anybody. Everyone's waiting for the horse and carriage. Everyone's using this space. Don't talk to me, don't touch me. So, so we haven't really changed our behavior really that much with technology. It's made things better, it made things worse. More or less, things kind of stay the same. So it's just one of the things to understand that we really need to embrace what we have and work with it. Technology is really heavily relied on right now, and these are the 3 symbols that cause most people angst. Anybody have children under 25? If they see these 3 symbols, they start getting the sweats. So, low battery, low Wi-Fi, and constant loading. So this is one of those things. How many times have you told your friends, who has a pack? I need to charge my phone now. And they're like, you need to put the phone down. Put the phone down. So this happens to me a lot. So this is why I'm speaking out of my own experience as well. Now in mobility, we have had, this is the reason I asked if there was any car companies in the room. We've been sold a bill of goods. There's no other way to say it, frankly. The last 80 years have been this incredible vision. When people say we need a new vision, we had an amazing vision. The vision was to get everybody in a car and get a car in every household. Job well done. Vision accomplished. This is what we've been sold all our lives. It's going to make ourselves, we're going to see these amazing places, which we did. We have this new set of freedom, which we have. It's going to allow us to experience things we couldn't experience before, which we did. And it's going to make us sexier. Everyone's going to want to be with us. It's going to get us the girl, the guy, whatever it is. We're going to feel more important. We're going to feel all these different things. I'm telling you things and you're listening to me going, deep down you bought your car because of those reasons. They've been planning them for you for like decades. This is just full surrender. Just experience it. So we all buy one of these and we're like, wow, I can't wait to do this thing. And then everybody tells the state DOTs like, I'm buying one of these, so you need to make sure you can accommodate me. And they do their best job to accommodate because they've been doing the best they can. But this is what we get. It's like, I didn't buy that. I bought this. I don't want that. That's gross. I didn't expect that. And then what do? We tell the engineers, solve this problem. They're just like, well, okay. You never ask an engineer to solve a policy issue. You ask an engineer to solve an engineering problem. That's what they're brilliant at. And so we should never ask them to solve this problem. It's not their job. Their job is to make sure it's safe, it runs, it actually works, the cambers work, the geometrics all work. Policy folks' job is to make sure that this doesn't happen, and that's the big fault that we have to deal with. We've also done some really silly things. In order to accommodate these vehicles, we have transformed. There's this concept called terraforming, where we terraform an area, we physically change its landscape. Some of my folks that I was working with at Google X were looking at how do we terraform Mars and how do we do all these different things on an exoplanet. We've been doing it on our planet. We have terraformed to fit in the car. This is Detroit in 1935, and this is Detroit in 1969. 60% of the space has been demolished to make way for the vehicle. That is a travesty, and in any economic model, this is what's called insanity. It's just economically irrational to do that. So we decided after World War II to divorce transportation from the economy, all the forces of logic, and say, let's separate it out and make it a different thing. And that's what we did. And we don't need to pretend that we didn't cause a lot of social and racial segregation issues because of this design. So we need to acknowledge that transportation was used as a force of good, but also a force to make things stay the same or get worse. And so a lot of the deliberate policies that were put in place are things that make us very uncomfortable today to realize that this is why things are the way they are. In a lot of the strategy work that I do, we always ask the question, why? Why is it the way it is today? How did I contribute to it? And what can I do to change it? And if you understand those 3 points, then everything else can flow on from that. And so when we look at our transport system today, we have some fundamental problems. Anybody who has gone to couples counseling knows that you have to acknowledge the problem exists, and then sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's their fault, but as a couple we need to work together and figure it out. I throw a lot of these things in here because it's all personal experience. So when you look at transportation, you say to yourself, wow, you know, here is a car, incredibly flexible tool. It's only used 5% of the day, and 80% of the time it's completely empty. When you're in it, it's 1 seat out of the 5, so it's 80% empty. If I went to my VC team and said, I'm going to ask for an investment in a project where I'm going to develop a new technology, it's going to be used 5% of the time, and it's going to be utilized only 20% of utilization. It's like, I'm not investing in this. But we do, because we've had, again, we divorce transport from economics. So this is why we have this. Now, those who are lucky to have a transit system are also plagued by the similar issue because they have this bus fleet, or train fleet sometimes, where it's overcrowded for just 2 hours of the day, and then it's basically 2/3 empty for the rest of the day. So we're moving these very large vehicles that are overcrowded for 2 hours, and then they're basically carrying squirrels for the rest of the day. So we have carried squirrels in Los Angeles. So it's like, I remember seeing that before. And I think in Oregon as well, they carried a wolf or a fox. So great. But I mean, you know, we need to make sure that the whole point here is about efficiency, that we're not using our system very well. So this binary policy that we've had for decades is no longer working because the world's changing very quickly around us. And this is one of the outcomes that we've seen with the space is that this is downtown Houston. These are all the vacant surface lots. So basically, 1/3 of the entire surface area of downtown Houston is devoted for cars that generate no money, no revenue, and actually cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars a day to maintain and operate. So there is a huge opportunity here to deal with as we move forward. Downtown Minneapolis, not that different. So huge opportunity here to understand all that surface parking lots and what you can do to work with that. So this is the opportunity to see what you have before you and what you can work with in the future. And then here's a typical scenario where we have tried to make sure that we have enough parking space for Saturday evening at Christmas Eve, and then the rest of the year it's completely empty. And it's very easy because we're so used to seeing this that we don't understand what the problem is here. Well, what's wrong with this? It's fine. I'll actually cover the area of surface parking lot compared to the rest of the land use, and that's what the city actually looks like. It's 2 buildings, and all of that space around it dedicated for this vehicle. So that is just wrong in every sense of the word, and it's a great opportunity for moving forward. We've also got some big issues to deal with in transportation that we haven't really wanted to deal with properly because it's too hard for some people to acknowledge the situation. Safety, efficiency, and access. On safety, 1.2 million people are killed every year across the world, 40,000 in the US. The US is just keep on ticking on, which is really, really annoying and frustrating. It's the equivalent of a 737 falling out of the sky every day. And if that happened, we would shut down the aviation industry. We shut down the aviation industry for about a day because someone forgot their dog up in an overhead cabin. And this is just the cost of doing business in transport. So as a transportation professional, we have to admit that we have failed. And we have a responsibility to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. The beauty is that we have a lot of tools in our toolkit that would actually help us get there very quickly. On efficiency, we spend 10 days of our lives a year on average commuting in to and from work and congested. We spend about 25 days of our lives in transport in some mechanism. So that's a lot of time. Why the tech companies love that is that's a lot of viewing time that they can actually go for now. So this is one of the areas that will be very interesting as we move forward. And access, 15% of the population has some sort of disability, not a wheelchair visible disability, but a general disability that prevents them from participating in the transport options that are available to them. So this is significant. These are not small numbers, and we need to do a lot better job than we've been doing now. This is the part that really is the technology piece. We have literally passed the threshold of being able to safely operate machinery today. No one is paying attention, and that is a real problem because the person on the left is not paying attention, but the only tool they have is a 1/10 of a pound device. The person on the right is driving a 2-ton vehicle, and they are a real threat to our transportation safety. And so we need to switch this blame game and basically say, okay, the whole thing needs to redefine itself. When we're working on Vision Zero, the whole point is that we know people make mistakes. Who has done this before? Who has texted while they're driving or looked at their smartphone? Be honest, put your hand up. State officials, you won't get fired. So, it's fine. It happens. Things happen. We make mistakes. The point of this, though, is to make sure that our transport system is forgiving, so that if we do make a mistake, it doesn't result in a serious injury or a fatality. That's the whole premise behind a Towards Zero, Vision Zero program. And the general sense is that this binary policy system is sunsetting. This is basically starting to drift. It means it's not going away tomorrow, but it's starting to sunset, which means the period of just having this system is basically going away. What it's been replacing is by this dawning of this new integrated transportation system, which is about choices based on the type and the mode and the opportunity. And what's interesting is that they're starting to gel around 3 fundamental principles. And what I always like to say is that it's not all about new tech. The old tech actually is also a lot better sometimes. And so why I love to show this is because the bicycle, which was invented 2 centuries ago, still is the most efficient human-to-machine integration ever designed. It also charges you. So that's a really important thing to remember, that sometimes it's the simple things in life that matter the most, right? So simplicity and technology are really things that we can embrace. And so those 3 fundamental shifts are the moving from what we have today, which is an ownership model, to more of a shared model, moving towards electrification, and moving towards automated services. It's happening in a transition because it won't happen overnight. It's going to happen in different pieces. But this is why I love this forum, because you're focusing on the next 10 years. This will happen over the next period of 10 years. And on the shared side, it's a very interesting opportunity to figure out what are the different things that we can do in a shared environment. Electrification has a lot of issues with it, the power source, the vehicle type, etc. But many of the fleet providers and many of the AV companies that I've been working with are all moving towards electric because it's just simpler and easier to use. So technology loves simplicity. And if the simplicity can be in the background, it'll prefer the background rather than the foreground. Technology that works really well is in the background. You don't notice it, but you really enjoy it. We can't see or touch Wi-Fi, but boy, we love it and we need it and we enjoy it. But we don't like buzzers and ding bells and other stuff in our face all the time. That stuff's really annoying. So the technology needs to be in the background, needs to be working really well. And with automated technology is going to happen through a series of transitions. And so what's happening now is on shared, there's this huge new frontier of micromobility. And whether they're the electric scooters, the bike shares, the e-bike shares, or the mopeds, these are the new areas that are starting to form because they're simple, they're cheap, quick, and they're easy, and they can be deployed very rapidly. They're starting to electrify as well. On traditional transportation, we're starting to see connections made for sharing. They're starting to offer more shared services. The last 5 years, we've seen more sharing of vehicles, passenger vehicles. Obviously, public transit was the original sharer, and that's getting much more robust in some places. But it's also losing ridership because they haven't figured out how to focus on the customer yet. And it's a fundamental shift that needs to happen, is that you will need to move as a transport provider to a provider that's focused on the customer. If you're not number one focused on the customer, you're going to lose them, because the new generation is all about customer service and customer appreciation, customer feedback, customer orientation, and that's the fundamental shift. When you read those reports, why is public transit declining? It's because of poor service and lack of customer focus. That's the fundamental truth, and many will not mention that, but that's the reason why. I worked in the industry for a decade. I can tell for a fact that customer service was not the number one priority. It was taking care of the drivers and looking after the elected officials. Wrong customers. Customers are the people who are riding the system. And then in deliveries on the right, we've already started to see these fleets are starting to move forward with a lot of different sharing services. What's interesting is that they're all now on the electrification path, every single one of them. Public transport's been leading the charge because governments have been investing heavily in electrification. The private passenger movement is moving forward, and so is goods delivery as well. What's fundamentally going to change all of this is automation. So what's missing? Power of observation, the people, okay? So in automation, what this does, it turns the entire thing on its head. All of our transport today is governed and dictated by the abilities and the needs of the drivers. So our transit fleet is designed around the needs and the abilities of the drivers. Our goods movement is designed around the needs and the abilities of the drivers. We have so many stops, we can only go so long. They need a break, they need to get out, et cetera, et cetera. Automation will not have any of these barriers, so the entire thing completely changes the whole discussion. So let me talk a little bit about automation so that we can be a little bit clear about what it actually means. So automation is a construct of a few pieces put together. It's a knitting of technologies. So artificial intelligence, a lot of math, a lot of algorithms, a lot of information there. Machine learning is basically a classification tool that understands through repetitive exposure how to see the world. And it does things like, for example, it knows a stop sign is a stop sign because it's seen it 100 different ways and it recognizes that. When I was working at Waymo, we would go through neighborhoods, and when the children would come out of school, the vehicles would understand that it's actually not school ending time, but some kids came out, the rest of the fleet picked it up straight away. The next day, it understands that there may be more children in the area, so I'm going to be more cautious. All that stuff gets programmed into the vehicle's technology so that it actually can understand and go through that process. But for it to actually do anything, it needs a sensor suite. So it needs a different set of sensor suite to understand what is around it. And then it needs to be mapped. It really can't see where it's going unless it actually has a trajectory of a map ahead of it. So what this looks like is you have this is the LiDAR radar camera suite. You have some sensors, and then you have a really fast computer inside the vehicle. So in the Waymo vehicles, up until a few years ago, it was probably one of the fastest computers in the world in each vehicle. So this is the kind of tech that we're working with. But it's really important to know that it's not about the vehicle. This is the tech. The automated technology is a platform. It's not a vehicle. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting stuck. They're calling it automated cars. It's AVs. The V is actually form factor agnostic. It can be anything. And I'll show what I mean. When the vehicle itself is in play, it's using that sensor suite to understand what's around it. It asks itself 4 fundamental questions. Where am I? So physically, where am I? What is around me? What's everybody doing? That's the most important piece. What's everybody doing? Trajectories, analysis, etc. And then what should I do next? Once it's answered that question, it now follows a safe path of travel. And so that's a really important distinction between AV tech, is that it has to ask itself and answer those 4 fundamental questions, and it does it a couple of thousand times a second to understand where it actually is. And then detection is the most important tool in this technology suite, because once it understands what's around it and what's everybody doing, it knows what its safe path of travel is in real time. So here is the Waymo tech acknowledging that there is a person on a bicycle, and they know what they're doing because they've classified the vehicle, they know the vehicle type, they understand all the different hand signals and hand gestures. They can tell when the person's hand's on the steering wheel where they're going to go based on the movement. And they also know that they're a cyclist, and cyclists sometimes change their mind in what they're doing, so giving it the extra space. But all that was coded into the technology. The technology itself isn't inherently aware that this is actually what I should be doing. So what the technology is coded with is fundamentally important. And as policymakers, understanding that is very critical to how it performs safely. Here is a little test that we did with a Google X vehicle, and these are cyclists. So 100 cyclists circling around the vehicle, and because it can see 360 degrees in every direction and can process in real time, it knew every single bicyclist because it could tell by our phones who we were. So that is something that is profoundly different to what we have today. The cool thing was that most of the people who worked there were also avid cyclists or took transit to work, so that was already baked in. Plus they have little kids, so it was all kind of baked into the system. But here's the difference. So when you hear automated driving versus regular driving requires you to have a steering wheel, brakes, and pedals, and you're in charge of the vehicle. You make decisions. That's regular driving. Automated driving doesn't require you to do any of those sort of things. If a person who is claiming to have automated driving requires any of these things, it's not an autonomous vehicle. It's that easy. Don't worry about the SAE levels 1 through 5. If it can do this, it's automated. If it does it, it's not automated. And that's the fundamental difference. This can have things called advanced driver safety stuff, like ADS. That's fine, and we need that because it's going to be really important for safety, but it's not an automated vehicle. The difference between this as well is that this is entirely focused on the driver, and the dashboard is all geared towards the driver. This is focused on the rider, and the rider experience is fundamentally different. So the cabin that they're in now is this space that we're focusing on and their experience versus the important dashboard material that they need to have as a driver. So driver, rider, that's the shift. Also, artificial intelligence looks at space allocation and looks at the space and says, what's the right mix for this in terms of our transportation system? So this is our opportunity to look at how do we actually classify people. An average person, regardless of what you've eaten lately, takes up about a square yard. This is the typical space allocated to a person. A person on a bicycle needs approximately up to 2 square yards. And so when you classify a person in their space, now you're reimagining the whole transport space that we have, we start seeing that that's actually kind of interesting, but this is what the person needs in a current passenger vehicle, 8 times the space for the same person. And technically they can fit 4 or 5 people, but usually it's just 1 person. And the reason for that is because safety, we have an engine in the front, we have a trunk in the back for your stuff, and we've made the vehicle out of metal for safe reasons, but it's taking up 8 times the space. When we do full cost accounting of the transport system, this is really expensive to operate and maintain. And it takes up a lot of other space around us. And so we look at it on a street level, and you can see, look at the difference. So this is how you do classification in artificial intelligence. They say, interesting, optimization, red alert. What is this? I can't make this work. So it's going to be very interesting as we move forward when we can start changing the form factor of our vehicles, that we can start doing different things. So that might be the ideal individual mobility vehicle of the very near future. It may not need to be that larger thing, because if we've made it safer and more shared, they won't need all that space. And then if we do have that regular passenger vehicle, we can now fit 8 people comfortably in their individual spaces. So there's so much opportunity here to change the paradigm without having to physically change anything on the street right now. Again, going back to the AI tech, it's about the technology. I'm going to say it until you guys nod. It's not about the vehicle, because that sensor suite can be added to basically anything. It can be added to a passenger vehicle, it can be added to a delivery vehicle, it can be added to a transit vehicle, it can be added to a ship, a plane, a mining truck. We got approached by the airports to do the docking when the planes land, to pick up the plane and dock it. As long as the thing moves, this technology can be applied to. So you have an opportunity now to really start setting the case about what do you want this technology to actually do for you. And the form factor will change enough that it won't look like the vehicles that we know of today. You know, they will look very different, and that will allow us to do a lot of different things that weren't possible before because of the change in the form factor. So this may carry a few people, and we may have a different type of topology where it may be for 1 person or 2 people, 5 or 6 or 20 or 30. The blurring between public transportation and private transportation will completely go away. We won't be able to know the difference anymore. It'll be based on the right size in the trip for the demand, based on the time of day, the location, and the land uses that we have. And we talk about the service in terms of there's an opportunity for having a AV vehicle that may be shared or that may be owned personally. The personally owned vehicle is a long way away. So anybody who's like hanging to get their own personal automated vehicle, you're gonna be waiting a while. The economics and the fundamentals are still being worked out, but the fleet system is what's charging ahead, and that's gonna be moving ahead really quickly. To create a fleet is fairly simple. Anybody who's been in the transit industry or the car fleet industry knows that you need a depot, you need some vehicles, you need some mechanics and some other folks in there, you need operators up until this system, and you need some pick up and drop off spots. Basically the same thing, difference being it has this heavy duty AI intelligence and a sensor suite. And you need some sort of way to connect people to it. So once you have this in place, fairly simple. This is the hard part, this is the simple part, so that we're clear. What's interesting though in the shared fleet opportunity is that there's two types of sharing, and I think it's a very important distinction to get that nomenclature right. A shared fleet can be utilized by one person or two people or 10 people. A shared ride fleet can make a fundamental shift in how transportation is utilized. And so you can start off with a shared fleet that is still individually accessed. You can also do a shared fleet that is accessed by many people. So there's ways to do that as well. We can look at ways that we can have a much larger vehicle and have the same norms that we have today. When we're in a large transit vehicle, we have enough space. We kind of don't make chit-chat, but we make eye contact, we kind of get along, etc. How are we going to behave in a vehicle that is a passenger-sized vehicle with no driver, and when we're sharing it? Do we talk to the person? Do we acknowledge them? Do we nod? Do we put our preference up front saying, don't talk to me right now, I'm working? What if you like their what if you don't like their music? What if you like them? You know, do you integrate it with Tinder? Like it's like, oh, I really like it, click, click. Like, what do you do? So, you know, for all the behavioral psychologists in the room, this is a huge, huge opportunity to understand what are the social dynamics and the social norms in these new vehicle types, because we haven't experienced them yet. The larger vehicles we've experienced because we've been in these. The smaller vehicles, yes, we've ridden in taxis, we've ridden in Uber and Lyft, etc. But that's a person who engages us. And how many times have you become tired from whatever you're doing, and the person, how's your day? How are you doing it? Please don't talk to me, right? But you don't say that because you don't be rude. But in this situation, there's no one in the vehicle. So when that first interaction comes, is it like, or is it like, who is this person? Do I want to know in advance who's coming in my vehicle and what they're like and what their types are? And then does that create a whole new set of the other and separation? So big, big questions that we need to deal with. But fun, nevertheless, for the psychologists and the urban researchers in the room, because it's going to be really exciting stuff. Also, inside the vehicle will change dramatically. So regarding the form factor, yes, we'll have the typical passenger seats, we can do all the typical passenger things, but we're going to have intercity services and longer distance services, and they'll allow us to have a much more different environment that's much more relaxing. Imagine a situation where you have these reclining seats, just like a business class flight that you get into. Those of you who are lucky to upgrade to business, you know, enjoy that opportunity. But even when you have the ability to just sit back and relax, a very different experience. We'll also be able to pack in more people, so much more upright services, typical subways with, imagine the seats removed and just lean bars, because this technology is focused on optimization. And the more we can optimize, the more we will. So again, different behavioral characteristics, different issues for all different types of users, but the fundamental thing is that they're charging ahead with this kind of different customization. The network itself. Right now we have a street and road network that is fairly standardized, and sometimes we're lucky if we have a transit line, and how people get to and from the transit line is typically somebody else's problem, and it doesn't really work, it's not very integrated. In the very near future, we've been adding different types of shared services to get first and last mile. With AV tech, the AV tech will probably start doing first last mile access to that main trunk transit line, and then some local neighborhood circulation, because that's probably where they're going to be moving first. But very soon after that, the entire network will be automated. So the transition is fairly rapid once the system actually starts to prove itself out. So questions for governance and operations are going to be very, very important over the next couple of years. And then the issue of what kind of fleets we actually want to have in our cities and our regions will determine on what kind of opportunities we have. What works in the city centers and the regions will be very different from works between cities and outside of regions. So these are all decisions that will work, and it may not be possible to push shared ride fleet service in day one. You may have to start with the shared fleets and then shared ride fleets because of the density factor. So, but again, that's a software switch for the AV. It's not about the AV or the tech. It's does your city or region have the density for this to actually work? And so a lot of this is going to be determining on what policies you put in place before the tech can actually even arrive. Some fundamental shifts that will happen. So this is a typical scenario that we see in the modeling of like, here is what we do with our transport system. It's about cars, more cars, and more cars. A shared fleet, which is just an automated fleet that's managed in the system, because it can move up to 20 to 50 people a day by itself in different situations, even as individual passengers, we don't need as many cars as we did before. So this is going to be fundamentally change the way that we look at our whole transportation system. Once the density is put in place where we can actually have the shared fleet that's also shared rides, we also start reducing a whole chunk of our vehicle fleet. And this is not forcing anybody to do anything. This is just natural response. So a lot of people in the room will say, well, I'm not going to give up my car. I don't want to do this. That's great. That's you, but you're not the majority. The majority is going to say, I want the cheapest, fastest, easiest thing to get around, and I'm going to hop into it straight away because that's how they respond to stuff. And as a transport provider, if your focus is on the customer and you can focus on quick, cheap, and easy, quick, cheap, and easy always wins. Just think about it for a second. When you make your decisions during the day, if it's cheap, quick, and easy, you probably say yes. Now, if it's right or wrong, etc., that's another issue. But this is the sort of thinking that's going behind this transition. So if we do that and we see that happening, what does that mean for our infrastructure? What does that mean for our finances? What does it mean for all the different things that we have? A lot of great opportunities, but there's a lot of caution that we need to focus on too. This is where the fundamental shift needs to happen. Cities, regions, states need to stop thinking about the transport system as this thing that is its own thing. And they need to start thinking about it as a platform. This platform is actually part of an ecosystem of services and uses. But for the system to actually work, we need to have land use, street design, parking management, and performance metrics all connected, because it won't work. And I really want to caution you here, saying that anybody who thinks that AVs will come and solve all their problems are in for a rude shock. Because it's an AI technology, it does what it's told. If you say you can only go in these areas, it'll only go in those areas. If you say it can do anything, it will do anything. Its job is to optimize, and optimize it will because it needs to. And so therefore, if your land uses are still doing the old school stuff, and your street design is still old school, and your parking is business as usual, and your metrics are still about moving cars, what do you think AV tech will do? It'll just reinforce this for you. So if you're okay with this and everything's fine, like ever seen those little memes where that little dog is having tea while the entire place is catching on fire? If you're fine with that, great. But I don't think you are, because that's not what you're here for doing this. So this is your opportunity now to really rethink this, because you have about a 2.5 to 3 year window to get it right before this thing starting to roll in. So, and a lot of it is fundamental building block basics. Mixed use, trans-oriented development, complete streets, all the good stuff that we know, protected bike lanes, high visibility crosswalks, narrowing down lanes to the minimum, all these different things, removing on-street parking and changing it to parklets, that sort of stuff. Parking demand management, working with everybody now to reduce the parking, so no more parking minimums, parking maximums, working on, if you have to build parking, level floors, no more ramp floors, because that'll be redesigned in the next decade. So everything you design in the next 2 years will stick with you for the next 50, And you don't want an obsolete city or region in the next 15, 20 years where people basically say, this is not working for me. They're not going to say, can you fix it? They're going. They're going to go to the cities that actually make this work. And with such flexible mobile capital these days, people are moving to where it fits their lifestyle and their preferences. And once the news gets out, it's really hard to change that discussion. So I can't stress that enough. Getting these 4 pieces together will actually help you with the mobility ecosystem, and the interconnections of that is where you'll see a lot of benefit. And so hopefully in the very near future, with your work that you do here, you'll have a shared electric automated system that really focuses on the person, no longer the vehicle, and that half of all your trips in your region, if your city is designed in a way that can accommodate this, up to half of all your trips should be by these modes: walking, scooters, bike share, moped, all the active mobility, micro-mobility stuff. And then the rest of your trips can be done by these shared automated services. Where are the private passenger vehicles? They're going to start phasing out. They won't go tomorrow, but they'll start phasing out. So you'll start seeing this little pie slowly open up as it grows. But that's not going to happen everywhere. So this is not a solution for the entire state. This is basically for central Minneapolis and some other towns in the area. You're also going to see this with freight. Freight's going to radically shift. We're going to have a lot more shared electric automated on this side, but then micro-mobility delivery services, cargo bikes, again, using old tech to do new things, and then a lot of drones will be deployed. Drones are still in their transition phase, so I worked on them for about a good couple of months at Google X. They are, the teams are doing some really cool stuff, but again, there's a lot of decisions that you need to make about how this actually works. But what is happening, that they are shifting towards this automation. And so when we think about the platform now, the platform is much wider than that binary system that we started off with the car and the bus. Now we have a huge opportunity to create a whole bunch of different services that can work for us. But this requires a lot of work, a lot of integration, a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration with each other, and breaking down the silos that we traditionally have not wanted to work and cooperate with. So admitting that there's some problems, admitting that there's some fundamental issues with the way that we're doing things, but then figuring out solutions to those problems and getting them done. One of the areas to think about is the cost of transportation right now. Many of you probably don't know what the full transportation cost is in your region. Not the public agency's cost, the total cost. If you don't have the full cost accounting in your system, you don't know what to work against. So developing a baseline of what does it actually cost to move people and things around in our region, that baseline allows you now to start doing some really good experimentation on what can and cannot happen. In particular, the issue around taxis and public transport and local deliveries and Lyft and Uber drivers, we have to determine what is the actual price we're willing to pay to move a person from A to B, and what is the price we're willing to pay for a thing to move from A to B. It may be something that we're not comfortable talking about, but the orders of magnitude between what a driver is paid at Lyft and Uber or a taxi and what a public transit driver is paid or a delivery driver is orders of magnitude different. And there's a lot of skewing there in the system. So issues of labor, issues of equity, issues of fairness, issues of living wages, those are things that will completely come back and keep reminding you you haven't thought this through. And so understanding the fundamentals of transportation finance is going to be critical to make this work. While this can actually help reduce the amount of parking spaces and parking in your region, many of your agencies rely on this revenue to fundamentally shore up all the bad decisions we've made in the past so we can keep this going. But that's going to flip on its head. You're no longer going to have those revenues, so what else are you going to have? The fundamental difference being here is that because you can redevelop your land, you're going to have to work very closely with developers to start figuring out these joint development agreements so you can get the financing that you need to keep maintaining your infrastructure. It also will beg the question that when will you start introducing road user pricing to make this actually fundamentally fair and equal for everybody? So that, again, that 1 square yard that you get and the 8 square yards that you need in a vehicle, you may have to now pay or you actually will, the technology will force you to do this, but you'll have to figure out how you're going to start making sure that everybody's paying their fair share to use the right-of-way. And in situations of congestion, think of this as an idea that you may be paid to actually ride a bicycle or walk because it's in a congested space. And you may have to pay a lot more to drive yourself in a large vehicle. That's economics. That's how the fundamental laws of supply and demand work, but we've divorced that. Now we're going to bring it back in because this technology will force that discussion. So think of that from perspective. And then what I want to also mention here is that a lot of this does not rely on the AV tech to come to fix this for you. You can do this stuff right now. There's nothing stopping you from having conversations with Uber, Lyft, and your taxi service to do employer-based services where you can reduce the need for parking on the employment sites, or with retailers, or with the transit system. There's nothing stopping you from putting in protected bike lanes across the entire network, of having a grid lattice network of protected bicycle lanes, and then allowing all different types of services to use those things. It's up to you. This is all up to you. These are not things that are brand new. On Vision Zero, there's really no tool that AV tech would help on fatalities and safety that can't be done right now. You only have to look at Sweden, who has been doing Vision Zero for 20 years, and they've reduced fatalities by 80–90% by doing the fundamental building blocks of the 5 E's of engineering. Engineering, evaluation, enforcement, all those different E's there. And so that's what I'm trying to say, like, the stuff's available now, that the tech is available today. What would be amazing is if you can get all those pieces in place so that when the AV tech does arrive, it basically helps meet those needs and actually supply them. So these are the real important messages, but there's more. There is a new change happening with how this transport system will connect with each other, and this lifestyle change is starting to happen now. Whether it's your assistant that's connected to your calendar, that's connected to weather, whether you have Nest at home, etc. All these different technologies are now talking to each other, and they're all starting to connect and create these deep links. So very soon, you will be told by your assistant in your house or at your office site, it's time to go now. Walk downstairs, there's a bike share waiting for you, or there's an AV waiting for you. I'm taking you to your friends. You're going to go into the movie. It's already been taken care of. The movie's been purchased. Popcorn's already ordered. Off you go, right? That's where the technology is moving. And so it's assisted living for all of us. And many people are going to jump at this idea, because we've already seen this starting to happen. When we're doing the testing in Phoenix, we're working with families who have 3-4 kids. The Chandler area of Phoenix is a very large family area, maybe because of a religion, but very large area, and very large family area, and many of the families that were using the services would be able to take 2 kids to baseball, soccer practice, all that stuff. Dad would take the other 2 kids to something else. They'd meet in the middle, and they'd say, we've got half an hour of our life back every day. This is fundamentally transformative for us. And so the other thing was like, well, how much is this worth to you? They said, it's priceless. Well, how much would you pay for a ride? Why would we pay for anything that Google has? We don't pay for things that Google's free. Why would we pay for it? So some issues to figure out there. But these are the kind of things. So imagine streaming video services, online learning, all these different things you can do in these vehicles of different shapes and sizes can really fundamentally change the way we use our time and our space. It also can bring in things that we haven't thought of, where we need to be very careful of for social equity, social access. Most of these services at this stage require an app or a smartphone or some sort of credit card system. Those who are unbanked or don't have access to services, how are we going to make sure that they actually get these services that are included? Many of the assistant type services are going to leapfrog all of that, so you just use voice. And if you can't use voice, you can use texting if you're unable to speak. So all of these different pieces now are starting to work and merge together, which is my way of saying that this is happening, and the policy area is what needs to do a lot of the integration work as well. And how it works in the region will determine and depend on how you want it to work. So that whole shared electric micromobility stuff may really work best here, and maybe a little bit here, and maybe a little bit there, but most likely inside here. The high-capacity AV transit services will work really well feeding these corridors. But then around here will probably be low-capacity AV technology, because that's what fundamentally makes sense. Until we can change these land uses, which will take a very long time, lower capacity, smaller size vehicles will probably make sense. And then we'll have some intercity movement with AV tech. And then in these rural areas and in these, like, the recreational areas, they may have their own versions. So all these different versions will be popping up over time based on the ability for them to scale and the ability for them to be making economic sense. If you don't want them to happen, then there's other ways to work around them to make them actually happen faster or slower, depending on how you want to do it. The thing that will happen, though, which will be very interesting, is that in the central city, because of all the different choices and services there, this will become much more intensified. This may become also more intensified because new downtowns may be springing up, but this areas as well may spring up more of these suburban communities. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen. A lot of people are pontificating it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be a little bit of both. And we're going to see intensification and dispersal at the same time over periods of time, depending on how the system and the regions that are there want this to happen. So if you want to make some choices about how you want your state to grow, now's the time to start putting these into place, because the AV tech will respond to the platform that it's given. It doesn't say, I don't like your platform, I'm going to do something else. It's like, oh, here are my guardrails, this is how I work. But without any guardrails, it'll do what it wants to do. And so that's something to understand. And so we may see a scenario of manual car sharing and manual ride sharing out to these areas and in these areas for a long time, and then AV tech starts permeating the suburbs and then slowly goes into the central city with high capacity AVs. To be determined, but it's a likely scenario. What's interesting is that we need particular types of people to make this work. And from the public sector side, this is the area we have the most opportunity and our weakest link. And I say the weakest link because this is fundamental to how we're going to move forward. These three job types don't really exist right now in the public sector, and we really need to move forward, because this is how the AV tech companies work, and they've got these types already. So the data scientist, she needs to understand data like nobody else. And she needs to know how to parse data, how to integrate data, how to digest data. Too many times cities ask these tech companies for data and they don't know how to digest the data. States ask the tech companies for data and they don't know how to manage the data, let alone store it and protect it for privacy purposes. So you're going to get a lot of pushback from these tech companies if you start asking them for data that A, you don't know how to use, B, you don't know how to store and manage, and C, you don't know how to keep safely. Because safety for them is the highest priority. I worked at Google and I got a new education on how they protect data and how serious they are about protecting data. Departments within Google couldn't access each other's data without a congressional approval, and you had like an hour to use it in a certain location because they're so concerned about privacy. So when I came in all naively saying, we need to share some data with the cities, they're just like, no. Not yet. So it wasn't no, it was not yet. So I was like, what do you need to do? I said, well, they need to bring up their teams so we can work together. And then you need much more understanding of the user. So behavioral science, urban psychologist, consumer psychology. That's a really important area, because you don't really know your customers because you've never treated them as customers. So whether you're a highway agency or a transit agency or a city, these are your customers. What do your customers need? How do you get more customers onto your system? How do you get more customers to use what you're doing? Tools like user acquisition, your growth strategy. Imagine public transit being funded not on the vehicles and the usual stream of funding they get, but the number of transport customers they can achieve every year. Imagine they were paid to get as many customers as possible. Imagine a highway agency got its funding based on its ability to manage demand and reduce VMT. Imagine that for a second. Your engineers would solve the problem tomorrow, but they haven't been given those orders yet, or those directions, because that's not what they're told to do. They're told to just predict and provide, keep expanding. And we're running out of money, folks. We don't have any money to do this. So we're being pushed into a corner very quickly. So again, the user behavior psychologist, very important. And then last but not least, and fundamental, frankly, is the storyteller. We need to tell these stories, because most people, when they hear this stuff, will freak out. And so you need to tell them stories of how this is going to work. What is the transition like? How are they going to be included? How are they going to be supported in this process? How are they going to be transitioned out of these particular potential jobs that will no longer be needed in 15, 20 years' time, what's a transition path for them now so the bump is as soft as possible? These are our responsibility. These are not things, well, that's another sector, we're just transportation. No, you're part of this whole spectrum of the economy. So is there a fund, is there an opportunity to work with a job skill training program now to start transitioning as these services start coming in? A, you'll be really thankful you've done this, and B, telling these stories will help you get to those things that are really important. Like, it's very difficult to take out parking for bike lanes. It's very difficult to change 12-foot lanes to 10-foot lanes. All these things that we know we should be doing are very difficult to do because we haven't told the story of why. Why is this important? And more importantly, understanding the difference between storytelling and just telling. You know, I'm here at a meeting to tell you we're doing this. Great, why did I show up? You know, it's like, I'm here to tell you a story. You know, does this connect? 90% of our brain is emotional understanding. Less than 10% is data understanding. So don't confuse them with data. This is why we have the country we have right now, right? It's not about the data, it's about the emotional story that we have. And our administration knows this very well. Like it or not, they know this piece of the human mind very well. So that's a very fundamental piece, is these three new skill sets. So it's about people, ultimately, as we keep saying, not about moving the infrastructure of things. And so moving forward, and I'm so glad you guys are starting this, it's about this really important partnership. This partnership between government, corporations, and academia. Academia is our number one fundamental opportunity because they know how to store data, they know how to manage data, they know how to crunch data, and they know how to analyze stuff in ways that we in other sectors don't really understand. Plus, they understand user psychology and behavior. They've been doing this for a while. And they can look at these fundamental pieces very well. The corporates, their job is very clear. They need to make a profit, make money, and they'll optimize as best they can. And governance is all about policy and setting the framework and getting the rules of the game well, but making sure the rules are fair and not punitive. Don't put one against the other because then these two are not going to work very well. So this is a really important partnership. And I want to close by just showing you, like in City Innovate, we had this program called Startup in Residence where we do that. We match governments, we help them identify problems, and then we match them with startups to solve projects in 16 weeks. So in 16 weeks, a solvable problem has been made and the cities can basically, or the regions or the state can move forward. It's a really, really cool process because it's really simple, it's using design thinking, and I think it's important for lessons learned for everybody else. In the meantime, we've had over 11 cities use this program, 53 startups, with 54 discrete problem sets being solved for, and it's helped improve the procurement process, digitization, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be done, it's very easy to do, we just have to fundamentally get our hands around it. And so I want to thank you all for your time. I'm going to close by leaving you these contact details here. But I want to just say two things. One is thank yourselves for being here, for starting this process. And understand that this is the beginning of a journey. And this journey will have some bumps. Forgive each other. It's going to be a little messy, but we're going to get through it. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Some questions?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So Tim's going to stay here because we need this to be the roving mic. Is that correct, Chelsea? Oh, we have another one. Great. All right. Well, you can still roam then.
Okay.
So we do have time for questions. We're going to run a little past 10 because this is a pretty unique opportunity. So I want to, while you're thinking, raise your hand and Chelsea will find you. And I'm going to ask you to clarify one thing.
Yes.
There were lots of images, and the one really key point that I know I didn't capture, the four things that are fundamental to the platform. So land use, and then you had three more images.
Land use, so I'll get them here. So it's, oops. Land use, street design and operations, parking, and the performance measures.
Okay.
So what do you want? What performance do you want? So a lot of the things we do right now are outputs based, and if we can go towards performance based outcomes, saying that we have 2 million trips a day in our city, we're going to go to of cars, we're going to go to 1 million trips a day in cars. How do you do that? Let the companies come forward with those proposals rather than saying you need to do this, this, and this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did the CTS storytellers get that down? Thank you. All right. So, questions?
Down there. Let me go over so you can see me.
Good morning, Bill Goins with FedEx, and really inspired by what you were describing this morning as you talked about economic development and hinge to transportation, something that seems to have kind of faded quite in many different areas. Can you give us some examples at all, Tim? And I know you talked a little bit about what's going on in Sweden, your work in Phoenix. What are those markets that really are starting to figure this out? And I think that's the call to action for Minneapolis, St. Paul. Who are we really competing with as we go forward over this next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's many cities that are doing what's called joint development, where they're doing development agreements with the transport system. I mean, Japan fundamentally started off this way. So we do transit-oriented development. Japan does development-oriented transit. And so every station is a platform with a supermarket, a shopping center, hotels, office, and those retail rents pay for the day-to-day operations of the train station, but the development itself pays for the actual connections. So there's a lot of different examples like that around the world. Hong Kong does it, a lot of the Asian cities do that. But in the US, many cities from coast to coast, San Francisco, Seattle, San Diego, Los Angeles, they've been doing a lot of these joint developments. You've been doing it here in Minneapolis as well. It's just doing it at a different level. It's basically saying that here is the transport system that we have, here is the land use system that we have. How do we match the two so that we can get an agreement between the two of them so they work symbiotically? Not we are going to spend all this money to put down a light rail line and then we hope 20 years from now with land use changes that it happens. How about do the land use changes now and put them in code so that the development agreements can actually pay for or maintain the light rail service that you want? That's the sort of difference. It's doing it together rather than doing it in sequence. Yeah. It's a great question, though. Yeah.
Thank you. John Halside with Minnesota Trucking Association. I'm pleased that you addressed freight, but
Yes.
it's kind of light in the mix.
Yeah.
Freight goes where people go, and fundamentally, even if we can reduce the footprint and usage of people, there's still consumers consuming goods.
Absolutely.
And the volume of things they're going to consume is just going to follow them.
Right.
So, and the nature of different types of freight, it's compartmentalized and palleted, it's easy if it's
Right.
overdimensioned.
Right.
How do you see freight in all its shapes and sizes and consumer demand that they want it now? How does that best fit into this? This is a big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal, and that's my other presentation that I have, so I just touched upon it here, but I have another one on freight. But you're exactly right. So the right-of-way is going to be fundamental. Curb management, how we manage the curbs. Right now, we manage the curbs. Most cities don't manage the curbs, or most regions don't manage the curbs. The ones that do, that have time of day use, etc., the space is too small now. And there's not enough of them. So dynamically managing the curbs digitally is where we're going to be going in the next couple of years. And because of the point, right now it'll be like a FedEx vehicle or whatever the truck it is, but very soon it may be a smaller vehicle, a robot, it may even be a cargo bike, but they're going to need to pick up and drop off a lot because people are going to be expecting things in seconds, not even minutes or hours. We're also going to see a big change in a lot of these micro mini distribution centers. So there's already the lockers that are popping up, but we're going to have more than lockers. We're able to get things made or done very closely. So the jury's out whether it's actually going to be threading into the fabric of the transport system or actually the transport system threading into it. It's still not clear. So we're still in that process of learning and understanding, but what we do know is that the traditional method of supply chain logistics is being turned on its head. And the micro-location piece is where a lot of the growth is going to happen. Because anybody who lives in an apartment building knows that your lobby is now full of Amazon boxes. And 2 years ago it wasn't. So this happened in 2 years. And so there's going to be a better way to do that. And I think they're slowly starting to think about micro distribution centers, but also micro pickup and drop-off centers. Just recently, FedEx signed a partnership with Walgreens. And so you can actually pick up your FedEx parcels now at every Walgreens across the country. So we're going to see more of these deep link partnerships, obviously Amazon and Whole Foods. So there's all these different pieces there. But yeah, to your point, managing the curb and managing the right-of-way, because every saving space we make from this person mobility will be taken up by freight delivery. because they're going to need a lot more space for doing a lot more things. The question is, again, to the point of the car, we can't fit this 40-foot truck in all neighborhoods in the future. It's going to have to become this very small vehicle. And will it or will it not be allowed to be on the sidewalk? A lot of questions that get brought up from that. But yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah.
Mary Carlson with Family Horn.
Hi.
So I'm one of those storytellers that you mentioned.
Great. We need hundreds of you.
Sometimes people don't think so, but.
Yeah.
So I'm married to a computer scientist, and we talk about this all the time at home.
You just need a urban psychologist for a baby and you're done. Okay, there you go. There you go.
So we do. We talk about this all the time at dinner, and one of the things that we've really been stuck on is this idea of security.
Yes.
So you mentioned data security.
Yes.
But what about, we've got these autonomous vehicles that are going around. How do we keep the kids safe? I'm a mom. How do we keep my babies safe?
Yeah.
These vehicles where there's nobody watching and taking care of them.
Right. I mean, so I have two parts to that question with the question. How are we keeping ourselves safe today?
A lot with people watching. I mean, drivers on vehicles, they perform.
Do you even hear the microphone?
Yeah. So I also do transit.
Yeah.
So in my world, the ways that we keep people safe are drivers. So whether we agree with it or not, drivers of freight vehicles are providing a tremendous security presence.
Right.
And then on transit, on buses, drivers are providing, at least here in this region, are providing a tremendous security presence, and they play an important security role.
Right.
And then on trains, we have fare collection and the police that are, at text message away.
Right. So I think you just hit the last one on the head. The driver itself is not the security presence, it's the person. The person's providing the security presence. So when we look at transit, for example, or any of those shared services, the driver is performing too many functions. They may not need to drive the vehicle anymore, but they may be able to provide a security presence or a roving ambassador presence. I think we're going to have to do very quickly, and I didn't really talk about this much, was we had elevators that were manually operated, and even when we had automated elevators, there was a person there for the first 10 years because we just wanted that safety feature. We're going to have do the same thing. We're going to have ride ambassadors, and those ambassadors will have to be roving around these vehicles just to keep everybody feeling comfortable until we're at that point where we don't need to worry about them anymore. On the metros, for example, or on the light rail lines, you don't really see the driver because you're in the third or fourth car or the fifth car, but you just perceive that there's someone there in case something happens, and there's cameras, etc. This will be the same thing. Also note that many transport systems that are currently automated, the automated metros in the world and the people movers, for example, there is no driver, but people still feel safe because the cultural norms are still the same. It's when you get to a smaller vehicle, that's where the cultural norms are not developed yet, and what does that feel like? So every time you get on a plane and you all do this, you're looking like, oh, please don't sit next to me, please don't sit next to me. And they don't, you're like, oh. And then when they do, you're just like, oh, what do I do, right? So we're going to have a lot of that. Whether it's a safety thing or security thing will be determined, but it's more about a comfort thing. Are we comfortable with this environment? And I'd hate to see a scenario where you can pay to opt out of that, and we probably will. And the question is, what does that do to our overall society? So these are the big questions that you will work on over the next couple of days and next couple of years. But yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah. Smart room, asking all the big questions. Keep me on my feet.
I'm Nicole Morris with the University of Minnesota, and I'm one of the user behavior psychologists.
Hey.
So I was is this going to be maybe we won't need them because of safety factors improving, but that is nothing worse than
Oh, no.
car seats.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, this is why most people don't use Lyft or Uber because they can't lug around a car seat for the kids, and even if the driver has one in the back, it's not every driver. So yeah, we've heard that acutely. So most of the team I worked with had kids from 10 to 0 to 1. So that would bring us up all the time. There's nothing better than having a built-in team focused on these things that are like, how do we solve this? So what Waymo is doing, and I think others will follow too, is they're going to have a universal child seat in the back of the vans. maybe 1 or 2 depending on the demand. And those are those new ones that basically form and mold. But it's a transition, and we're going to need those for the time being until the system can prove that we don't need to have these 2-ton metal machines anymore, and then we can actually just have regular seats. But the initial pilot was limited to people ages 8 and up, so that we didn't have that. So we're trying to eliminate all of the different barriers so we could get the pilot up and running. And even then, there was people saying, I can't join the system because my kid's 2 years old. And recently, they've been experimenting with how that would work. But yeah, the childcare seats, the stuff thing. Where do they keep all the stuff? You know, so if you're having a shared fleet of vehicles, where do you keep all your stuff? And most of you don't want to admit it, but there's 2 leftover pieces from Costco in everybody's trunk, and 2 leftover things from like the recent trip, and the umbrella that you'll need maybe for whenever, but you don't really use it, and 6 pairs of shoes and all that stuff. And so how do you keep all that? Where do you do that? And is it in boxes, and are they in lockers around the city? All to be determined. You know, these are all things to be determined. But yeah, really important point.
Okay, last question?
Maybe two more here.
Yeah.
Michael and John. I have invested in technology companies, and I'm curious about your insight, having lived inside Google and inside the tech infrastructure, about how we should be thinking in the state of Minnesota about potentially partnering with technology companies and the service providers to which they are working, whether it's Tesla or folks like Uber. The context being that many of those companies in the tech world want as few constraints as possible.
Right.
In the world in which they function. So
Right.
whether it's Uber going to Arizona or other things like that,
Right.
which can facilitate a race to the bottom,
Right.
that isn't exactly the future we all want.
Right.
But at the same time, we want a seat at the table and we want to be engaged. So I'm wondering if you can share insight
Yeah.
on how you get inside those companies,
Yeah.
how A, you would think about it from our perspective, and B, how they think about partnering with people in a state like ours relative to their other options.
Yeah, so that's a really good point on the first one. So from my experience, what I can tell you is that, yes, the least constraints, the better. The more inviting and the more open the environment, the better. But it depends for what it is. So for the initial testing phase, 0 constraints. That's what they want, because they want to test stuff out and see how it goes. That doesn't mean that there aren't safety precautions put into place. Like when I was working at Waymo, we put in a very clear safety report, guideline structure, and framework with the emergency services team, with the state. We developed protocols with them, what to do, when, and how, why, etc. We work with all the mayors in the region, we work with the MPO and the DOT, everybody in place to say, this is what we need to do to operate, and this is what they need for us to operate. We had things, for example, we brought fire trucks and ambulances and all the emergency services vehicles, and they basically did a parade with our vehicles for a couple of days so that our vehicles would calibrate to all of their sounds and frequencies, because the tech uses something like Shazam where it listens and it can hear, oh, that's a fire truck, it's going this direction, I should respond according to state DOT law, or if it's going away from me, I don't have to respond. So those are the partnerships you can do up front. We also did things like understanding what kind of data could be actually worked with together. If there were traffic changes or construction changes or any changes to the streets or the right-of-way, if we could receive that as quickly as possible, we could map it and then basically work around that. And so those are the kind of initial pieces, but that's for testing and demonstration. When it's full deployment for actual service, that's where you need to be a little bit more clear about what your platform looks like and what you'd like this to achieve. It's no different than when a car share provider or a bike share provider or some other service wants to come in and open a market in your area. My only caution would be that, to your point about the race to the bottom, if it's because you want shiny new and you want to point to shiny new, I'd be careful about that. I'd say that this is actually to solve a problem. So the moment you have your problems clear about what it is you want to solve, they're going to come and find you because they want to solve that problem with you. Yeah, really good point.
And I've got a follow-up question here, thanks Michael, which is around the separation that you talked about between transport and economics.
Yes.
At some point we just lost that path, that connection. Most people probably don't even know how much it costs for them to get here this morning. Maybe if you took transit, you know what the fare you paid,
Right.
the full cost of transportation is probably something none of us really have a good grip on. including the traveling public.
Right.
How do you see this technology or mobility as a service bridging that? And how do you pair up other services so that it fits this blended model? And then to the government point, and putting on my government hat, how does all that get funded from a government perspective? How does government take a cut of mobility as a service so that we can maintain the infrastructure, or maybe even build that vision towards an infrastructure of the future that is more smart, that is more connected?
It's amazing questions. I'll do my best to answer that one. I think it starts from governance and policy. Like, what you do really well is set the framework and understanding what does it actually cost to move around your city. What is the total transportation budget that is allocated for your transportation system, public and private? I did this for San Francisco because we had the same thing in San Francisco. They didn't know how much things cost. And we spent $1.5 billion a year on transport, and that's what they thought our transport budget was. I was like, no, but there's another 500,000 cars that spend at least $6,000 a year each. And so the real budget's $4.5 billion. And we're saying if we can get the $4.5 billion budget down to $3 billion or $3.5 billion by doing all these things, everything that we've been trying to do that was too expensive from the public side is really cost effective. So getting those private partners engaged in that full cost accounting, that's how they live. Their entire world is full cost accounting. So bringing that into the governance of your work, and then showing the avoidance cost, because government isn't in to make a profit, but it's hopefully in to save resources and money and do things more efficiently. And so that's your bottom line. If you can actually show that and understand that the cost of moving someone on a bicycle versus walking and transit and driving is this, and you say this is how many trips we have in our model, that's the true cost of our transport system. And if you want to do imagine a cap and trade program over years to reduce that cost, now you're improving equity, you're improving public health, you're reducing costs for the hospital industry in your area. How we sold Vision Zero to the public health department was that they were spending $15 million a year on out-of-pocket medical expenses because Medicare wouldn't cover it. These are collision-based things. And I was like, I can save you half of that if you invest half of it right now so we can do more of these safe streets. And there's the connection right there. So the public health department's like, oh, now I've got a vested interest in Vision Zero because I want to reduce my Medicare out-of-pocket costs. So finding all the key pieces of the economy that will benefit from these changes, and then get them to basically opt in and buy into that process. That's how you can get it started. Big question to unpack, but yeah, that's how it started. Thank you.